Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, July 15th, 2020, and today we're going to be taking a look at a 2020 presidential election prediction. So we're actually going to go ahead and take a look at just the evolving electoral map. I know I've used that term pretty often, but you also have to realize that this map is shifting further and further leftward, and that's not because of, just the country itself. It's more so the fact that Donald Trump is pushing away a number of Republicans that would be traditional Republican voters. So this is not to say the Democratic Party is automatically a shoo-in for every, subsequent election, but it is to say that the Democratic Party is at a very good point right now. The Republican Party is losing not only here, but in the House and the Senate. Before this video, actually, we dive right into it. If you're wondering what website I'm using yet another political map simulator, yapms.com, YAPMS. It's a very good website, very interactive, and there's way more maps than just the presidential electoral map. So I think that's something that we should all go ahead and take a look at. It's a really good website, and I've been using it for around a year now. So looking at this electoral college map, there is a lot that's different and a lot that's the same. Obviously Donald Trump retains his overall solid majority in a number of these states based off the data that we have, and even though some outlier polls may indicate that states such as Arkansas have all of a sudden narrowed up to within a couple of digits, I don't necessarily buy that. Obviously, there are fluke polls, as there were in previous elections, not only 2018 or 2016, but in years past. But Arkansas, I definitely could characterize as safe Republican at this point. I don't think that Joe Biden has a realistic shot at that state, despite some data indicating that it is remotely even a possibility for Vice President Biden. So we still don't know who the official Democratic nominee is going to be. I think we can be pretty safe to assume it will be a woman of color. Right now, it seems like the leading contender is Senator Kamala Harris from the state of California. If you remember her, she ran in the 2020 presidential election, dropped out before any official primary, so she didn't get any delegates, but I do think that she is pretty noteworthy, to say the least, and looks like she actually might be at the top of the list, along with Representative Val Demings from Florida and Susan Rice, who doesn't necessarily have a home state, but has a home district of D.C. So as you can see, there's a lot more toss-up states on your screen than what we normally would expect. And this just comes as a result of a lot of political forecasters narrowing up some of these more solid Republican races. Sabato Crystal Ball actually just moved over Kansas into the likely Republican column. I still think it'll be safe on the presidential level, but I think some more notable ones, Utah, Indiana, and Missouri, and Mississippi, they have all been close in 2008 or 2012, so I do think that we should discuss it a little bit more. Alaska recently narrowed up along with Montana, but these are going to go to Donald Trump on Election Day, almost without a doubt, unless something drastically changes on the presidential electoral map, which, knowing 2020, is very possible, but at this point, I'm going to characterize those as Republican states, but we're just going to talk about them for a brief moment. So no, I don't think Indiana or Missouri or Montana or Utah or Alaska are going to be targeted by the Biden campaign for a presidential victory. They definitely will target it for maybe the Mike Parson governor race in Missouri, or the Montana Senate race, or the Alaska House race, whatever it might be. The Democratic Party probably will target some of these states, but not so much on the presidential level. We probably won't see too much Biden ad spending in Missouri or Indiana. Even though some, races may indicate that these races have gotten closer, not races, some political forecasters such as Sabato Crystal Ball, or even, not just that, but a number of forecasts such as JHK forecasts have narrowed up some of these states. The Economist definitely has. So some of these states have actually become a little bit more competitive. I have in the past characterized Mississippi and South Carolina as likely Republican states, and I do stand by that. I think both of these states will narrow up below 15%. But it seemed almost foreign to me to even consider Missouri or Indiana being under 15%. Under 15% does not necessarily mean it's competitive. I wouldn't necessarily say Indiana was winnable for Barack Obama in 2012, and Mitt Romney only won it by 9%. So Indiana and Missouri, I do think, do have the real possibility of narrowing up, and given Donald Trump's very horrible position at this point in time, very well could be closer than expected. I mean, Indiana was a 19-point margin in 2016, and for people to not really say that Donald Trump could even lose 4% of voters, you're kind of overestimating the vote share that he's probably going to get in 2020. At this point in time, he's lost a pretty significant portion of that swing base that voted for him in 2016. A lot of those independent voters that have since moved away from the Trump campaign after voting for him in 2016. We definitely could see them come out in Missouri voting for Joe Biden, even though they did vote for Donald Trump in the past. So as Indiana, Missouri characterize as likely Republican states, I'm also going to characterize Montana as well. Though Utah, even though Mitt Romney's, I guess you could say protest vote against President Trump, we don't know officially who he's voting for, but we can all infer, unless he does write in his wife again. But Montana, I think, will be within 15%. I do think that also has to do with the fact that Steve Bullock is on the ballot as well, and there's a competitive governor's race, and there's a competitive House race. Utah, however, even though, like I said, Mitt Romney did not endorse Donald Trump, you also have to take into account for the fact that Donald Trump still won here in 2016, despite another Republican being on the ballot, who actually got almost as many votes as Hillary Clinton in this state. Hillary Clinton still only got around the same number that Barack Obama got, around 1 in 4 voters in this state, but the vote split was definitely very different amongst Republicans. So while I don't necessarily think a bunch of Republicans will vote for Joe Biden, they possibly could be voting third party or even write in Mitt Romney's name. You never know, but I still think Donald Trump will have a larger than 15% win over Joe Biden in this state. Alaska, I still think will be, likely. That doesn't mean it's going to be realistic for Joe Biden, but I do think that this state should be characterized as likely, meaning the margin will be less than 15%, as it was in 2016. A lot of people seem to forget that. So looking at this overall electoral map, we still have some other states that are actually likely, if not safe, for the Democratic Party in 2020. New Mexico, I'm actually moving away from the likely column down to safe. Not down to, but further left to the safe Democrat column. Now, New Mexico, though it went to Hillary Clinton by around 8%, we're seeing Joe Biden considerably outperform Hillary Clinton in every single demographic group. Most notably, I guess turnout numbers are what's super important. Though Biden doesn't necessarily energize the Democratic base or energize independent voters, a lot of people are energized against Donald Trump. And a vote is a vote in this election. It doesn't matter why you're voting. As long as the candidate's getting your vote, they're pretty much going to be at a much better chance at winning the race. And right now, Joe Biden's winning that anti-Trump vote. He's winning those never-Trump Republicans. And in 2016, a lot of those never Trump Republicans actually voted for Donald Trump. It was never Trump until it was Hillary Clinton on the ballot with Donald Trump. But Joe Biden considerably outperforms her in terms of approval, in terms of support from Republican, never Trump voters, in terms of support from independent voters, amongst white voters, black voters. Though he seems to be underperforming in Hispanic voters, you also have to take into account for the fact that white voters make a much more considerable portion of the electorate. And, those 2-3% that Joe Biden's losing amongst Hispanic voters will definitely be outweighed by that 9 to 10% he's gaining amongst college-educated white voters or non-college-educated white voters. So New Mexico, I'm going to characterize as a safe state. It definitely could return to 2008 type numbers where it goes into the safe Democratic column, meaning it's a 15-point margin or higher. As much as I'd like to characterize Virginia as a safe Democratic state, it does have a lot of Democratic tendencies, but I don't think it's officially there yet. I do think that Virginia will be a likely Democratic state, joined by Colorado and Nevada, and surprisingly, not too surprisingly actually, New Hampshire. So what's different about these states? Well, these definitely aren't the only likely Democratic states. It's just the first ones that I like to characterize because Hillary Clinton won these states back in 2016. That's not my only reasoning as to why Donald Trump won't win them, but it's part of it. Donald Trump hasn't really gained on any Clinton voters. As long as those same voters remain in the state, Donald Trump doesn't have a realistic shot at flipping them. Yes, I understand the Republicans really want to see New Hampshire competitive. It has in the past. But based off all of the data that we have compiled across all 4 of these states, Donald Trump isn't even within striking distance of Joe Biden in any of these states. Colorado, Joe Biden leads by 17%. Hillary Clinton was up by 3% on Election Day, keep in mind, and she won by 5%. So if the Democrats outperform again, based off 2016 data and the incorrect numbers, Joe Biden would even, have a very solid margin in Colorado. Biden leads by 8% in Nevada. Trump was up by 1 on Election Day, ended up losing it. Biden is up by 8% in Virginia, by 8% in New Hampshire. And these aren't the only states that Joe Biden seems to be doing very well against President Trump in. He seems to be doing very well across the nation. And every single time I make one of these election predictions, I always think Donald Trump can't get any less electoral votes. And while in a sense that's right, he probably won't dip down below 204, 200. It's going to be very difficult for him to even get past that 270 mark, to even get to 270. At this point in time, the best he could do probably is right under 300 electoral votes, given how many voters he's lost. And yes, we have 4 months to the election, but then it's 3 months, then it's 2 months, and Biden maintains his lead. And coronavirus hasn't gone away. And nothing has really fundamentally changed for America. In fact, our economy probably is still stagnant and hasn't shifted much. It's going to be very difficult for Donald Trump to rewrite what's happening and become the favorable candidate for this 2020 election. So the Democrats do have other likely Democratic states. Minnesota, I would say I would characterize as a likely Democratic state. I would also characterize Michigan, Pennsylvania, and, as weird it is to say, Arizona as well. So this actually puts Joe Biden past 270 electoral votes. Arizona I characterized as a likely Democratic state before. I characterized Michigan and Pennsylvania. And though the Arizona data seems to be narrowing up just because of that one poll that showed Trump ahead by 4%, I absolutely see that as an outlier. I think it's very difficult to say that Arizona is going to be a likely Democratic state, but given all of the data that we have right now, not only in the Senate election or in the House elections, or even in this presidential election between Biden and Trump, based off what we see, Biden seems to be doing very well against President Trump. In 2016, Trump led by 4% on Election Day, only won by 3.5%. Though that is roughly the same margin, Biden leads by 3% right now. He leads by 4% in some of the polls, 5%. And I do expect Joe Biden to outperform that on Election Day, as the Democrats did in 2016 and in 2018 as well. It seems states such as Nevada and Arizona and Colorado, Republicans are overestimated based off their actual margin, and New Mexico included, and even Texas. So looking at this entire southwestern region of the United States, the Democratic Party seems to be on track to outperform the data that we have right now. And I do think that's enough to put Joe Biden over the top in these states by a likely margin. Michigan and Pennsylvania included, Donald Trump seems to be alienating these voters day after day. And I think the economy was a major issue as to why Donald Trump was elected in the first place. He was a businessman. He was an outsider. He's no longer an outsider. And yes, he's still a businessman, but he's also the president of the United States under a crippling economy. I understand the economy isn't a direct result of his actions, though in a sense it could be easily spun that way by the Democratic Party, very easily. Donald Trump is losing that same issue that was giving him the edge over Democrats. He was disapproved of in terms of handling immigration, in terms of handling the coronavirus, in terms of handling foreign affairs, literally everything except for the economy. That's the only thing that kept him around 44 to 45%. But after, there's a pretty significant portion of the American electorate that says, wait a minute, the economy isn't so good right now. I lost my job. The unemployment rate has spiked. And yes, we are amidst a global pandemic. But that's none of Joe Biden's fault. Unfortunately for the Republican Party, there is no incumbent except for Donald Trump. So the only person they could blame is either governors or Donald Trump. You can't blame someone who isn't in office. So Joe Biden is going to be using exactly everything that's happening right now. Coronavirus has turned 100% into a political issue. Wearing a mask has turned into a political issue. I think if the Republican Party had immediately cut this off and came out in support of wearing a mask or completely against it, I think that things would be going very different. But since we're having a miscommunication between the senators and the president and the governors, it just seems like the Trump White House doesn't have it all together. And Donald Trump going out on press conferences and making statements that are only further alienating or at least pushing away and making race relations worse in this country, coming out and saying more white people are killed by the police. I think America knows that because America is 60% white and 13% black. So that's obviously, why. And even though the difference is not too much. Looking at the amount of white people that have been killed by police versus black people that have been killed by police, the numbers, they aren't even, I would say, but there's a very small difference. And if you compare it to the overall percentage, there's a very disproportionate rate of black people being killed by police per capita. So that's besides another point. That's for another video. But I will say Donald Trump making statements such as that, number one, is misleading. I will say I don't think that's me attacking him personally. I think that's just making a very general statement. But I don't think it resonates well with the American people whatsoever. I think, in fact, that only angers the African-American base that came out in 2018, that didn't so much in 2016. Turnout went down 7% amongst black voters from 2012 to 2016, which ultimately handed Hillary Clinton a loss on Election Day in 3 key states that Joe Biden is obliterating Donald Trump in right now. So speaking of these 3 states, the rest of the states, actually, we need to characterize Maine. Forgot about Maine for a second. Maine at large is a likely state for the Democratic Party. Joe Biden's at 278, which means Donald Trump could still win every remaining state, including Wisconsin, and still lose the election. So while I don't think that the electoral map is going to change much between Joe Biden and Donald Trump based off where it was around 2 weeks ago, I do think that Joe Biden has advanced in a certain region. I think that he's definitely going to increase support amongst the Southwest region, including Texas, which we will get to probably right at the end of this video. Donald Trump, I do expect to carry Maine's 2nd congressional district. I think it'll be a lean margin. I don't think Joe Biden is the current favorite to win that race. Even though there's only one poll out that shows Biden ahead, I still think Trump will narrowly get the edge there. As for Nebraska's 2nd district, I definitely could see Joe Biden narrowly winning here. If we take a look at this district's history, the only time it voted for a Democrat number 1 was Barack Obama. And Joe Biden, I wouldn't say is Barack Obama, but he's outperforming Obama's 2012 numbers in a number of Republican areas. He's outperforming drastically Hillary Clinton's numbers on the national average and in statewide races. So while Barack Obama may outperform Joe Biden in certain Democratic states or certain swing states, I think Joe Biden makes up for it where there's a majority white electorate, and the Republican Party is loosening their grip on suburban white moms. White women in general have not really voted for the Republican Party in the past, but they really need to keep that margin low for the Democrats versus Republican vote share, because white men are also narrowing up, but in favor of the Democratic Party. Joe Biden seems to be winning, white college-educated men, but not white non-college-educated men. And the demographic groups that pretty much benefit the Democratic Party are, number 1, minorities, of course. Almost every minority group, actually every minority group, splits for the Democratic Party pretty drastically. I think it's 90-8 amongst black voters, 70-30 amongst Hispanic voters. So the margins are always good for the Democrats amongst minority voters, but white women seem to be driving up the numbers for Democrats nationwide. In 2018, that was the case. Democratic registration is going up in suburban areas where there's a very large white population. Northern Virginia, for example, is a perfect example of how much the country has really changed. Though Virginia, I wouldn't say is an exact representation of the country. It is definitely to the left of where the country lies. I will say that the Virginia GOP definitely gives us a general example of what could happen as the Democratic Party increases their appeal to white voters and maintains their appeal to minority voters. So let's actually go ahead and just characterize some of these states so you aren't just staring at the same 132 toss-up electoral votes. I think Biden will carry Florida. I do think that he will carry North Carolina, and I'm actually comfortable enough to characterize Wisconsin as a likely Democratic state. I know this is the first time that I probably characterize Wisconsin as likely for the Democrats in quite some time, but data point after data point points to, that was weird, but points to the fact that Joe Biden probably will run up the numbers across all 3 Rust Belt states pretty significantly, enough to be characterized as likely states. North Carolina and Florida haven't really come out with any good news for the Republicans or Donald Trump, whether it's a House race, whether it's the governor race, whether it's the Senate race, or the presidential race in North Carolina, or the presidential race in Florida. In fact, Joe Biden leads Trump by a larger margin in Florida than he does in Wisconsin at this point, based off of the RCP average. So keep that in mind, though I do think Florida will absolutely narrow up and be a lean Democratic state. Joe Biden still wins it regardless, and those 29 electoral votes go to the Democratic Party. So looking at the remainder of the 78 electoral votes, Donald Trump will likely get all of them. Iowa, I think, will still be a tilt Republican state. I also definitely see Ohio still narrowly going to the GOP, and I know it sucks just because of the fact that it's voted right for the past 6 decades, and now it's going to be wrong based off the data that we have, but it is possible for Biden to win, and it is possible for Trump to win, so we actually should go ahead and take a look at Ohio a little bit closer on election night, because it usually votes with the election winner, but we could either be in for a surprise, or Ohio could be wrong for the first time in quite some time. Over half a century. So Georgia, I still think that Donald Trump narrowly edges out Joe Biden here. Democrats have really peaked off here in numerous elections. And I think, yes, the Democratic Party has a much better shot in Georgia than it did in 2016. It was a likely state in 2016, around a 6-point margin for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. But I really think that even with increased African-American turnout, the Republican Party will narrowly edge out that state for Donald Trump. Will it be competitive in the future? Absolutely. Will it be competitive in 2020? Absolutely. But I don't think that it's an automatic shoo-in for Joe Biden just because of the fact that there's increased African-American turnout. North Carolina is definitely more lenient to the Democrats than Georgia has been in the past. Florida and North Carolina, though voting with Georgia most of the time, have voted for a Democratic nominee since the year 2000. Georgia hasn't since 1992. So Texas. This is a pretty big state, 38 electoral votes. I like to refer to it as the Republican Party's California, but we all know that's no longer true. California is a safe state. Texas is by no means a safe state. So Texas, I actually am going to characterize not safe, not likely, not lean, but tilt. And I know it's weird. It's weird to see that I even consider Texas as being less than 1%. And I know I'm going to get attacked for this, but that's just what all data is indicating. And yes, I'm putting full faith in the polls. No. If you take a look at increased Democratic turnout in the primary elections, in 2018, I think the main difference between Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton is that Joe Biden wins amongst demographic groups that Hillary Clinton could not. Not only is he doing that nationwide because he has a 10-point lead when Hillary Clinton only led by 3%, that's a 7-point difference, but in Texas, Joe Biden is actually outperforming Beto O'Rourke. While I do think Donald Trump will still carry Texas on Election Day, and I think the margin will be very close, and the Democrats will also be very close within reaching Texas and its 38 electoral votes, I still think the Republicans will narrowly edge it out, but it will be closer than any previous election. And probably will be a Democratic state within the next couple of decades, and absolutely a swing state in 2024, if not lean Dem by that time, because Texas is changing very rapidly. There's a huge influx in immigration in that state and influx of minority voters from all across the country, and Texas is getting bluer right before our eyes. So from what used to be a safe state in my characterizations, down to likely, down to safe, has now become a tilt state and joins the rest of the other 40 electoral votes considered as tilt for Donald Trump. So that's pretty much it. Joe Biden still remains at that 334, but solidifies his margins in a couple of states, and Donald Trump loosens or gets weaker in a couple of Republican states. Obviously, they probably or more than likely won't flip, but I will say that the margins definitely are going to be closer than where they were in 2016, which points to all-around bad news for Donald Trump nationwide and in pretty much every single swing state. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Please consider subscribing on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. I know this video is long. I apologize for that, but there is a lot to dive into when we make videos such as this. Go ahead and check out the next video on your screen and a playlist for my previous 2020 election predictions. I think you'll find them pretty interesting just based off how much they've changed over the past couple of months. Again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.